Hi again and welcome back to Platonic Soul. I hope you've been well. So today we'll be looking at this crowning image, you could say, of Plato's symposium and really of Plato's entire theory of love and desire, the ladder of eros that the prophetess Diotima presents us with. We'll be climbing the ladder with her, and when we get to the top, we may find ourselves transformed in a way that it has been really the point of this whole video series to explain. This ladder of Diotima's is where we really start to get to the point of it all. The process symbolized by this ladder is really nothing other than the process whereby, for Plato, we come to have better lives through the understanding of our own desire. To sum up what we were saying last time, the idea behind this image of the ladder, this final and highest mystery, as Diotima has called it, of love and desire, is of getting human beings out of or up from a kind of passive, fatalistic kind of living, perhaps more passive and more fatalistic than we're consciously aware even, in which we're all seeking the good or beautiful. We're all, in our diverse ways, reproducing in the beautiful, but kind of blindly. We're not really deeply free because we're not really aware of what we're doing. To use this image from the Phaedrus, we may take flight in this or that activity, but we don't really know the secret of making the wings of the psyche grow back again, of what we should do to make this happen. And so the ladder is the process by which we attain the good or beautiful in what you could call an intentional way, rather than just accidentally. In other words, it's the process by which we learn not just how to reproduce in the beautiful or good, but to do it knowingly so that we can make progress in it. This process, the process symbolized by Diotima's image of the ladder, starts from what you could call the lowest form of human desire and proceeds step by step to the highest. And now these are just kind of spatial metaphors, but to put it kind of in more precise language, the ladder proceeds from the most particular to the most universal, from desire for beautiful things to the vision of or unity with absolute goodness or beauty itself. It's a ladder, but actually also, in a way, it's a kind of spiral staircase because it has this recursive character. It kind of goes back on itself in a way. There's this repeated pattern of first enthusiasm for an object of desire, followed by disillusion as one discovers its limitedness, followed in turn for new enthusiasm for a new object of desire, a new, more universal way of conceptualizing what it is one wants. The hypothetical lover that Diotima talks about here proceeds from a love and desire for beautiful bodies, to physical beauty as such, to beauty of soul as it exists in ideas, activities, and laws, and branches of knowledge. And since, as we learned in the Republic, the principle of knowledge is nothing other than the absolute good or absolute beautiful, the love of knowledge takes us inevitably to a glimpse of the good or beautiful itself. The lover is turned, as Diotima puts it, to the great sea of beauty filled with love of wisdom. Here's how she sums up the whole process. One goes always upward for the sake of this beauty, starting out from beautiful things and using them like rising stairs, from one body to two, and from two to all beautiful bodies, then from beautiful bodies to beautiful customs, and from customs to learning beautiful things. And from these lessons, he arrives in the end at this lesson, which is learning of this very beauty, so that in the end he comes to know just what it is to be beautiful. Now, this, I think, is the crucial point, and it's here really where Platonism differs from so much other philosophy, especially from Western philosophy of the Enlightenment and a lot of philosophy that's taught in universities today. And the philosophy of the Enlightenment tended to be focused on the question of how we know, and so it had a tendency to take on a kind of abstract quality. It's a certain branch of learning that has its own boundaries. The latter may here also seem at first a kind of exercise in abstraction, the gaining of a new proficiency in the use of clear and distinct ideas. But actually, the real Platonic enterprise goes quite a bit deeper than that. The point is not just the sharpening of the mind, but the transformation of the self. And Plato repeats that a couple of times, at least, in his writings. It's my conviction that the underlying, or at least main motivation of Plato was love. And so the goal driving the whole system really is the sharing of deep, by which I mean reasoned, hope. You might remember in the first couple of episodes of this series, I talked about the two kinds, these two very basic kinds of human despair. I mean, not despair over this or that outcome, but existential despair. And these were, I called them objective and subjective despair, the thoughts that both the world and oneself may not be good. And this latter that Diotima presents us with encapsulates Plato's counter to existential despair in both these forms. And I'll tell you why. We see first Diotima claim in her latter the solution of objective despair. She doesn't put it in these terms, but you can see it. Because she argues that the ultimate satisfaction of human desire is attainable. This, of course, is what the lover enjoys at the top rung of this ladder. And it's the same as the vision of the one or good as we saw Plotinus describe it centuries later. It's the enjoyment of that ultimate object of our desire that at the same time is not an object. The principle of objective and subjective being, of the world and of knowledge, that can only be grasped through ecstasy, or perhaps better put, through a unitive knowledge in which the difference between subject and object that we live every day is overcome in some way. This is the end of that cycle of disillusion and infatuation, because here there can be no disillusion. Disillusion happened as the lover, ascending the ladder spiral staircase, became aware that the way they had conceptualized the object of their love or desire was limited in some way. But here there's no limit, no categorization, because in a way we've reached a kind of cognition that passes beyond conceptualization or categorization. And this, I think, actually is probably the most difficult to grasp of all Plato's teachings, that there can be this highest point of cognition, which he calls noesis in the Republic, that somehow rises above or beyond abstraction. But it's also the teaching on which all the rest depends in a way, because it's the key to the resolution of this apparent struggle in the psyche between that in us that seeks truth and that in us that seeks unity or immediacy. Because in this highest moment, the two are at once satisfied. As Diotima puts it, the man who has been thus far guided in matters of eros, who has beheld beautiful things in the right order and correctly, is coming now to the goal of eros. And I'm using again the translation of CDC Reeve, except I'm not really fond of the way he and others translate eros as love, because I think it's equally translatable as desire, but probably better yet left untranslated. And I'll use his translation, but I'll just substitute eros for love. He's coming now to the goal of loving, of eros, Diotima says. All of a sudden, he'll catch sight of something wonderfully beautiful in its nature. That, Socrates, is the reason for all his earlier labors. First, it always is, and neither comes to be nor passes away, neither waxes nor wanes. Second, it is not beautiful this way and ugly that way, nor beautiful at one time and ugly at another, nor beautiful in relation to one thing and ugly in relation to another, nor is it beautiful here but ugly there, as it would be if it were beautiful for some people and ugly for others. Nor will the beautiful appear to him in the guise of a face or hands or anything else that belongs to the body. It will not appear to him as a speech or a kind of knowledge does. It is not anywhere in another thing, as in an animal or in earth or in heaven or in anything else, but itself by itself, with itself. It is always one in form, and all the other beautiful things share in that, in such a way that when those others come to be or pass away, this does not become the least bit smaller or greater, nor suffer any change. That's what she says. And so for Plato, there's reasoned, objective hope. Reality holds real possibility for the satisfaction of our deepest desire in a way that these two fundamental apparent parts of us aren't in conflict with one another. And so the world can be said to be fundamentally good. But Diotima doesn't stop here, of course. Her ladder also offers grounds for subjective hope. One lesson she teaches here is that our conception of the good or beautiful shapes our action. The limitations or qualifications we habitually put on our conception of the good limit our ability to act for the unlimited or unqualified good, the good as such, the universal good, the good for the other as for ourselves. This is something we've been talking about in recent episodes, how evil actions are the result of a limited conception of the good. But the better we're able to apprehend the good, the better we will act. And so, as we move up this ladder, we can expect to act increasingly in a manner that is universally or absolutely good. This process climaxes, of course, when we reach that final, unqualified beauty and good. And this vision, Diotima says, stays with us in some way. We become forever changed by it. In her words, there, if anywhere, should a person live his life, beholding that beauty. If you once see that, it won't occur to you to measure beauty by gold or clothing or beautiful boys and youths. And we've talked in previous episodes about this Athenian paiderastia. And then a little later, she asks how it would be, quote, if someone got to see the beautiful itself, absolute, pure, unmixed, not polluted by human flesh or colors or any other great nonsense of mortality. But if he could see the divine beauty itself in its one form, do you think it would be a poor life for a human being to look there and to behold it by that which he ought and to be with it? And I think this is just a fascinating sentence, by the way, because she's so clearly alluding here to noesis, that highest immediate form of human cognition. And you'll notice that instead of using these verbs that convey ordinary abstractive thought, like knowing or thinking, she talks about beholding, being with, touching the absolute beauty or good. And so she says, or haven't you remembered that in that life alone, when he looks at beauty in the only way that beauty can be seen, only then will it become possible for him to give birth not to images of virtue, because he's in touch with no images, but to true virtue, because he's in touch with the true beauty. The love of the gods belongs to anyone who has given birth to true virtue and nourished. And if any human being could become immortal, it would be he. So for Plato, not only is there reasoned hope for our improvement, the process by which we get better is really nothing other than the process by which we get happier. So there's a kind of natural drive to virtue, a sense in which it is our nature to be good. And actually, people, this passage takes us to the very end of the Diotima passage of the Symposium, this passage that, even though it is being told at so many removes from us, you might remember that's how the Symposium is structured, probably comes pretty close to being Plato's own teaching on Eros. And it takes us pretty much to the end of Socrates' whole speech. He now returns to addressing the party guests directly, though really only just to finish up. He takes us back to the reason for this and all the other speeches in the first place, which of course is praise of Eros. You may remember he began his speech by finding fault with unqualified praise of Eros. But finally we have here his answer, the underlying theme of his speech, that not Eros as such, but Eros practiced well is what ought to be praised. But there's hardly anything more worthy of praise than Eros practiced well. And the ending of his speech is actually what's partially captured in the Greek text. You may have noticed that I chose to illustrate the main page of this YouTube channel. He says in full, "I was persuaded, and once persuaded, I try to persuade others too, that human nature can find no better workmate for acquiring this than Eros." And I should mention, on the one hand, it's a bit unclear exactly what Socrates means by this, as Diotima has actually just given us a whole string of desirable things: true beauty, true virtue, the love of the gods, and immortality. And yet, actually, on the other hand, I think probably the distinction is kind of moot, because all these things really denote what you could call a kind of transcendent life, a life that transcends the limitations of the everyday, a life that is divine insofar as this is possible for human beings. So he says, yes, I try to persuade others too, that human nature can find no better workmate for acquiring this than Eros. That's why I say that every man must honor Eros, why I honor the rights of Eros myself and practice them with special diligence, and why I commend them to others. And there was supposedly a shrine to Eros in Plato's Academy. Now and always I praise the power and courage of Eros as far as I am able. Consider this speech then, Phaedrus, if you wish, a speech in praise of Eros, or if not, call it whatever and however you please to call it. So this is the end of the speech of Socrates, and in a way it caps the entire dialogue, though only in a way, as we'll see, and you may already be aware. The dialogue's not quite over yet. But the important thing is that we now have fully unveiled Diotima's philosophy of Eros, which is at the core of the entire tradition of Platonic love. And I think it goes without saying that the significance of what she has told us can hardly be underestimated, if it's true. I mean, this in a nutshell for Plato is how we're to live a better life, how we're to win what he refers to in the Phaedrus as the true Olympic Games, the great contest of our lives, which is how to love well, how to discern the object of our desire. And so that's one reason why we're not yet finished with this passage on the ladder of Eros. We need to figure out whether it is, in fact, something we can and should take seriously. Because if it is, so much would depend on it. Anyway, that's what I'll be talking about next time. I hope you can join me then. And until then, be well, and thanks for watching.